Dzień dobry, witamy podczas drugiego dnia Early Music Plus webinarów organizowanych przez Akademię Muzyczną w ramach programu Sztuka Doskonałości. I dzisiejszym gościem naszego webinaru będzie Marco Vitale, który przedstawi dla Państwa temat Early Music New Technology. Zapraszamy do słuchania.
Recording engineer, and I will be with you this afternoon for a webinar on new technologies and early music. First of all, I would like to say thanks to the Music Academy Midcourse for organizing this and for inviting me, and thanks a lot also to Eva Witczak, who I know her for a very long time, and she was the contact with the Academy. Therefore, I'm just going to introduce different points of the very complicated topic. We can talk about all these things because there is never time to talk actually about the philosophical approach on many aspects of the music and the recording of it, which is, especially in these days with the coronavirus lockdown, it became a very important thing to discuss. How can we reproduce the music in a different environment than the one is recorded? I'm a musician, an early music specialist, and a harpsichordist. I play organ, and I also studied piano in the past. And I lived in the Netherlands for 9 years, and since when I was recording with my own group as a performer, as a musician, I had a lot of interest in the recording process because I'm pretty a nerdy guy, so I like new technologies and I like different things, and I always had a big interest in the process, in the making of the recording, in shaping the sound. So together with the sound engineer when I was recording in the Netherlands, I started to have to develop that passion, and slowly I became independent, and I started to have my own company, my own recording label as well, and I do recordings for other musicians, for other friends and colleagues and artists in general. So why did I start this? Because the thing is that being a musician, I believe that I have a different vision and approach to a person that is only a recording engineer. Often, recording engineer is also a musician, but in my case, let's say that these two figures they go pretty together in terms of time that I invest in both careers, let's say. So I'm a full-time musician, and I also do full-time recordings. So that I never forget the experience of being on stage. I never forget the experience of being a musician. I never forget that creating music, it's something that it's somehow related to a very magic moment that happens with all the hours and study and preparation, of course, but there is a moment where the music happens, the art happens, that needs to be captured somehow. It needs to be created first from the musician, and at the same time it needs to be captured when making a recording. So all this magic that happens somehow, it's not very easy to describe with words, but we all know that this happens when we listen to a fantastic performance. It's so fascinating for me. It was always fascinating, and I always wanted to get to that. Let's ask a question. What is a recording? For me, a recording is a moment that is captured in a media. The media could be anything, any media. But this moment that happens could be more or less beautiful. Of course, it depends from the performer, because it's the performer who makes the music. But that moment is captured by microphones and stored in a media. And this has to be reproducible later. So we have these three elements for having a recording. First, we have to have a performer. Second, we have to have a capturing device. And then we have a storage media. And then we have to have the possibility to reproduce it again. And because if we don't have one of those, we cannot have a recording. Therefore, we have to make some decisions on what to capture, how to capture. Because the recording as we see it nowadays and as we use it nowadays, which means media of a CD or digital distribution. I'm not talking about music associated with an image, because that's another field. But anyway, the recording as we consume it, let's say, generally nowadays, which is we buy a CD, or we listen on Spotify, or we listen some recordings on other media, other platforms. It doesn't have a visual element. That is a big difference for me, because whenever we are listening to performing live and there are musicians playing live music, we have our eyes, and our eyes can, let me use this word, can zoom in somehow. So even if we don't have a lens and we cannot actually zoom like a camera or like a recorder, a video recorder, we can still focus on somebody. So if there is an orchestra playing and suddenly our attention gets in the viola players, because the viola has an interesting part for us. What happens is that we focus on the viola performer, and suddenly we start to hear more from the viola. But it doesn't mean that the viola is louder. It's just our concentration, our brain gets more concentrated on the viola part. Let's try to say this in other words. Without the visual element, we miss our eyes to focus, for example, as I was telling before, on the viola player. So we cannot see who is playing in that moment. So without that element, the sound engineer has to make a choice in terms of directness. So who is more important for me when I place my microphones or when I place the ensemble? So because the placement of the ensemble is done by the music director of the ensemble, or if there is no one musical director, is done by the ensemble itself. If it's a small ensemble, the musicians decide themselves how to place themselves. And then, if there is a placement of an ensemble, there is a possibility of stressing more some instruments instead of other instruments. So if I put one violin in front, of course, that violin is going to be heard more from the people listening there, because it's more predominant somehow. I've been, I work as a performer with Jordi Savall, and I remember him all the time. It seems like wasting a lot of time, but it's not wasting a lot of time. It's really investing a lot of time in placing the ensemble. So he goes himself and he starts to move around the chairs of the musicians, because he wants to get that sound from the group for a live concert, for a performance. So imagine for a recording, it's even more important where the placement of the ensemble is there. So because I am assuming that what the microphones are listening is not that different from the people that they are listening. So for that we need to get into a third point. So the third point is from these choices that we have to make, these compromises that we have to make. How much of the acoustic do we take? How close do we get? And how much blending of the group we take? So how many instruments do I want to hear more? It's getting very complicated. I'm asking a lot of questions already. So we have to get a little bit to the basics of the recording techniques, maybe just to get a little bit a common language, because otherwise I will be talking about things and there is a risk that not everybody understand and get what I'm saying. So the basic of recording techniques are microphones. So because without that we cannot record anything. There are different types of microphones. So they are classified. The first type of microphones that is the most perfect microphone is the omnidirectional microphone, which is a microphone that has a pickup of 360 degrees, as you see in the image I'm going to show you. Then we have a cardioid microphone, which has a different angle of pickup. It's not 360 degrees, as you see it in the image. And then we have some other variants, for example, type 8, which takes from the front and from the back and not from the sides. And then we have the hypercardioids, as you see in the image, and also the wide cardioid, also, which is in between omni and wide cardioid. What does that mean? The choice of microphone, it depends on how much room I want to take. What is the ratio, the proportion between the sound that comes from an instrument and the amount of reverberation that comes from the room, or reflection of sound that comes from a room. Let's not get too complicated, but if we are in an ideal situation where we are, for example, in the Concertgebouw Amsterdam, or in a beautiful studio, for example, Polish radio studio in Warsaw, Studio One, which is very beautiful for recordings, or beautiful concert hall like Mozarteum in Salzburg, for example. In that ideal situation, we have a possibility of using microphones that take the acoustic of the room, because the room was designed for making concerts, and in case of, for example, Studio One in Warsaw, it was designed to make recordings. So there are no very strange or bad or annoying resonance. The reverb time is naturally pleasing, and the room was designed to have a really good reverb time. But there are some other cases where, for example, the recording has to be in a church with 5-6 seconds of reverb, because there is no other way, because the concert has to be there, because the ensemble has a contact with the church which has easier facilities, because the ensemble cannot afford to pay a concert hall for a recording. I mean, there are mainly budget problems also in choosing a location for recording. It's not always ideal, it's always a compromise. So in that places, then we don't have to take the acoustic from that room, which means we have to use technology, we have to use microphones that focus more on the sound and reject the room. But it's not always possible to reject completely a room, because part of that acoustic is going to get in the microphones. And on the other hand, the music, it's made by instruments or voices in an acoustic. So the acoustic is part of the sound and the acoustic is part of the music. I could mention a beautiful story of a friend of mine who is a scholar, is Mark van Scheelwijk. He did research on music from Bologna, from San Petronio. And while he was digging in these manuscripts in Bologna, in Italy, he found this music which was always in D major, always for bars, like 16 bars in D major, then another 16 bars in A major chord, and then getting back to D major again for another 32 bars, something like that. And then the first thing you see and you comment is, oh my goodness, how boring must be this music. That changed until the moment he performed that music in the church, because San Petronio has a big reverberation. I think it should be really above almost 10 seconds, I think. So if you take that music in the church where it was composed and performed for the first time, I mean, it was composed for being performed in that church, you realize that all these sequences of D majors make sense, because there will be a chance to understand the change of harmonies in a fast time with that slow acoustic. So the thing is that acoustic is part of the music, but somehow we are sometimes forced by the events or the budget problems or whatever, that we have to somehow get in situations where the acoustic is not ideal for the music we are going to record or perform. So that's why we have to use different microphones. And that comes the question number one that I was telling before. How can we get a decent sound without being so overwhelmed by the reverb of the acoustic? Is it a possibility? Yes, it is possible by using certain microphones instead of other microphones. But then the question is, how direct should we be? How direct the sound? Because if we use certain microphones, we cannot get too close to the instruments, because there is another problem, that the proximity effect. So that these microphones get very different response in frequency when we get too close to the source. That things that doesn't happen with the Omni microphone, which is the perfect microphone. It's in itself, in theory. So again, another problem, another compromise. And to be honest, if we get too close to the source, there are other problems too. I mean, a singer, for example, as much as I love singing, I like to listen to a singer from a couple of meters of distance. I wouldn't like to be in front of a singer and being with my ears 30 centimeters from her or from him. That would be too close. So it's the same impression I have when I listen to some recordings and the singing, for example, it's too close to the listener, and I have that impression, because we can all decide when we record how far it should sound by just placing the microphones closer or farther away. There is another big problem, for example, that happens with the organ. I did a recording, and I was performing and recording in a beautiful church in Rome, in Italy. It was an old organ, and I found this organ from the 16th century, very rare. And the restorer was telling me, oh yes, this organ is fantastic, but they did a very bad recording of it because they put the microphones too close and the sound was really annoying. Because in ancient organs, the pipes are made in a way that they do some stereo effects somehow. So you have, for example, C sharp or C coming from left side and C sharp from the right side, and then the D from the left. And it depends from the design of the pipes in front, because sometimes the pipes are like that shaped. So you have that effect. So which it gets pleasant or it gets lost or nicely hearable when you have some distance. But if you put the microphone like 30-40 centimeters of distance from the pipes, then you have this wrong sound of the organ, and then the one who restored the organ and heard it back in the CD said, "Oh my goodness, this is just impossible to hear it because you have these two speakers making this very silly sound." So that's why it's important to take into the account the distance from the source, depending on the source also. So if I have an organ, I have to keep in mind that the organ has to be has to be heard from a distance. Nobody will ever listen to the organ where the organ is displaying. So that's the thing. That's the big question. Also, a singer. You can listen to a singer from a short distance, from a small distance. But anyway, the ideal distance for listening a singer, it depends also from the acoustic. But anyway, there is no one rule. But generally, at least a couple of meters of distance. Of course, a microphone doesn't behave like 2 ears. And that I need to introduce, after I talked about the microphones and the type of microphones, I need to introduce another point, which is the concept of stereo, which is the basic for all our recordings. Now I'm going to talk to you about the stereo image, which is actually the most basic element of the recording. We all see, generally in 90% of the times, that we have two speakers, one left and one right speakers. So two channels, one left and one right. To make a stereo recording, we need also two microphones. So to reproduce a stereo recording, we need two speakers. But to make a stereo recording, we need at least two microphones. We need two microphones, two channels. Why? Simply because we have 2 ears, and the stereo concept, it's a reproduction of our human system, that we have 2 ears and we listen the world around us with that. I will show you now. You can see the dummy microphone from the dummy head from Neumann. It's a microphone which reproduced the head, or the human head, and it has microphone capsules in. So you can see there. If you have seen that head, it's much easier to understand the concept of stereo recording. So we need two microphones, two channels, and we need two speakers for reproducing that. So if you see what we hear for example, from the right ear, it's also sound coming from the left side. And therefore is the same with our left ear. We can hear sounds coming from the right. So it's not that there is a line in between our nose and we cannot listen to what's around us. So this is the magic. This is the great thing of this human hearing, and also the recording system. And also the difficulty, because somehow we need to reproduce that separation which is made in our head by the nose and our eyes and how the head is constructed, but that separation needs to be reproduced by the microphones too. It's very interesting because exactly you cannot divide completely things between left and right, but there is something in between also. So that's why when you have a mixer, and I will show you the mixing desk, for example, you have something which is called pan. The panning means it's just a sign to the left or to the right or to something in between, to the values in between, where the sound is assigned somehow, so to left or right. So when you record in stereo, the left microphone should be totally left and the right microphone should be totally to the right. So in the past, let's say in the 60s and the 70s, some radio stations or some concert halls, they were investigating, they were trying to find the ideal setup for recording orchestras with just two microphones in a stereo array. And therefore you have in France, for example, you have ORTF, which is a system of recording. You will see it in the picture. 110 degrees of angle between the two microphones and 17 centimeters of distance. They arrived to that by empiric, by just trying out and imaging the human ear, the hearing, and just arriving to that result. Of course, you need two cardioids for that, not two omni, because otherwise it doesn't work. Then there is another technique that you will see it from the picture now. It's NOS, which is the Dutch radio from the Netherlands. The technique, which is a very nice technique. So you have left and right, the microphones spaced of the space between the capsules is 30 centimeters, and then you have 90 degrees of angles. So you see there is another technique, for example, which is, for example, the spaced omni that is done with two omni spaced around 40 centimeters, 45 centimeters, 35. I mean, that it's also depend on what you want to get. It's really a lot of personal investigation and research done on that side. Another interesting technique is the XY technique, which is two microphones with two capsules in the same spot, angled by 90 degrees. So this is also a very interesting stereo technique. So there is no one recipe. There are many recipes for different problems and different applications of recording. So it depends from what you want to get. What I wanted to say with this little introduction for stereo techniques and type of microphones, that because of that we can reproduce an image. So in the ideal world, I will be able to make a beautiful recording with just placing two microphones, which represents my system, my ears, and it's like a person sitting in that room, listening to the group, to the soloist, to the ensemble, to the vocal ensemble, to whatever you want to record, and you listen to the music. So this is the best option in the ideal world, because it's also the easiest. You don't have to deal with a lot of channels, with a lot of microphones, with cables, with transports and so on. If you have a beautiful acoustic and you have a nice room and you have a beautiful ensemble, great players, good instruments, you put the two microphones and it's done. Is it really so easy? Well, I must say yes, but the placement, for example, and then the musician comes, the placement, for example, must be done in advance. So you cannot change later the things. So if you have an orchestra, which is pretty obvious, then you have a setup of the orchestra, a symphony orchestra, which is pretty standard because it's a setup which developed in many years and it arrived to a certain stability. So you have that setup and you don't have to move really around people and things. I mean, you can really do micro movements, but for example, if the trumpets are too loud, you just send 50 centimeters a bit in the back. But anyway, the concept of the symphony orchestra is already consolidated. So you can risk to have a beautiful recording with two microphones. But the thing is, we go back to situations where they are not so obvious, for example. So where the placement is not really possible and ideal. Then we need to use a multi-microphone technique, which then I ask you, is it better? Because I often hear people around asking or saying, commenting about some sound engineer says, oh, he's so good, that sound engineer is amazing, he really brings a lot of microphones, he made like a recording with 20 microphones. I must say, the number of microphones doesn't always mean increase of quality in the recording. You can make a wonderful recording with just two microphones and a good placement of the ensemble, because that's what counts. Good placement of the ensemble and a nice acoustic. The technical advantage and the technical solutions that we have is to compensate problems of the reality of the real life. I mean, of the musical aspect, musical or practical aspect. So, if I'm going to use more microphones than necessary, there is a situation where I have an acoustical problem. So that means that I have to compensate some lack of information that I get from that I don't get from the situation of the recording. Where two microphones are not catching everything that I need, then I need to put a third, a fourth, a fifth microphone. Okay? So it doesn't mean that if I record with 20 microphones that it's the best recording you can get. It just means that either you have different problems to solve in the source, one, two, either that you try to don't make choices before you record to do them in post-production later. So for example, balancing of the instrument. This is another big problem that happens nowadays in recording. When I listen to some recordings available in the market, I often hear a wrong balance. For example, I hear, I mean, the biggest example is that when the theorbo, it sounds louder than timpani and the trumpet, because it's just pulled up. You don't hear that in a real situation. Often with the harpsichord, with the basso continuo, sometimes it's really simply too loud, too direct. You don't hear the harpsichord so loud in normal life. I mean, when you go to listen to a concert, unless you are just in front of the harpsichord and you have the singers on your back. I mean, but who is listening to that music for me? I mean, this is my approach. I try to make recordings that sound natural. Maybe for one reason. Because I'm afraid that people, when they go to listen to a real concert, they will get disappointed because they are used to completely different and unnatural system. For me, what counts is that the recording, the sound, the music has to sound natural. What does it mean natural? It means that it just takes into the account and the hierarchy between instruments. If there is a trumpet playing, it's all, of course, it has a different impact and a different sound than a lute or a harpsichord. It cannot sound so direct. The harpsichord or the lute cannot sound so direct and face like 20 people playing against that harpsichord. I mean, I'm a harpsichord myself, so I like it when I can listen to the instrument, of course. But that doesn't mean that I'm happy when the instrument is just the volume is pulled up, because for me it's some a little bit unnatural. So we have to remember that when we do the post-production. But why did we arrive here? Because I was talking about the possibility of adding some microphones to the main stereo recording. So when that happens is because we need some control on some extra instruments. I give you an example. When I record, for example, a small ensemble and with 2 violins, cello, harpsichord, lute, and 1 singer, there are many ways to solve this situation. So the first thing, how are we going to position the ensemble? Because this is the first thing that we have to talk about when we place a recording. When I'm asked to make a recording as a technician, as an engineer, the first question I ask, could you please draw a map of how you intend to place the musicians? And the second, the reaction that I often have is that people don't think about that in advance. They think about, we just put each other, we just sit each other and make music. But this is a very important element that needs to be thought. So, of course, if the ensemble didn't try it yet, I understand that you need to rehearse and then you need to find your place while making the music. Of course, on paper you cannot do it. But it's important to think about and to have an idea, at least. Then the idea can be changed if it doesn't work. But it's good to start with an idea. So the thing is that the ensemble has to have a position in the so-called stage. Some other groups or situations is that the people are put by circle, for example, and then the microphones are in the middle. I personally don't really like that solution because then the stereo image is a little bit artificial, because you have to convert a circle into a two-dimensional space somehow, into left and right. And I really don't think it's the ideal situation. For me, the ideal situation is that when you place your group like you are in a concert, because then you have the ensemble in one space and the public in the other side. So, and you place the microphones where the ideal public, which is not there for the recording, or is there for live recording, then it's easier to get this stereo image. It's more effective. Of course, it's not cool because in the circle is cooler because people can see each other. It's nice to spend 5 hours, 6 hours a day looking at each other and making fun when playing. This is nice, okay? But generally, if we are talking about like 2 violins, cello, harpsichord, and singer, I think it's nicer for me to place the ensemble where, in a way that resembles the concert. I'm not talking about some specific vocal groups, for example, that they sing in circle also in the concert, because this is a completely different situation. So whatever works in a concert, I would actually first try also in a recording. And then, if the idea is bad, we can always change. This is not a problem. But instead of starting with something that it's not it doesn't give a guarantee that works. I would start with something that it gives a guarantee that at least in the concert it worked. So then we can change and we can see that, and then we can say, okay, this maybe in the concert was good, but for the recording I will swap some places and I will move the harpsichord, and that way I will put the lead off, or maybe I will put the lead on. You know, different things which can be changed when you have something to start with. So, getting back to the problem, let's say, to the situation in when you have this ensemble and then you have to make a recording and say, okay, let's see what sounds good. So then you put your two microphones, the stereo, the main system, I call it. I mean, not me calling it, but it's generally called the main system. And for me, that has to sound good. So I have to find the sweet spot already with that. If I don't get the all detailed informations with that, then I start adding different microphones. For example, if the singer is too far, because she or he singing far away, simply from the thing is happening, the music is happening, then I have to add a separate microphone for a singer, or a pair of microphones for a singer, because then it sounds nicer with the stereo situation also for the singer. So sometimes, for example, if in a concert situation the singer might be too close to the microphones because normally the singer was closer to the public, then what shall we do? Then I have to put the microphone back, and then I will lose maybe the detail for one instrument which is on the back, which works in the concert but doesn't work on the recording. But then you add an extra pair of microphones there. So again, there is no specific formula, but as a musician as well, I feel to give a recommendation on that and saying that it's very important to take into the account the performance, because the recording is part of a performance. It's not a separate product. If the performance works, the recording is going to work well. If the performance doesn't work, it doesn't work. The recording is not going to work. The sound engineer is not going to fix the things that don't work in the recording. Okay, there are many tools available, and maybe the recording can be saved. Some problematic things could be saved, but it makes a difference between a wonderful performance and a not wonderful performance. So we can hear that main difference. So I go back to one thing that I was saying before about this idea, this conception that the more microphones the better. Is it really true or not? Well, it depends if you know what to do with all those microphones, because the microphones again are a tool. They can be used well or they can be used badly. Generally, there is one problem with multi-miking. The problem is that adding more and more microphones without knowing how to place them, it can lead to phase cancellation, which means, in few words, that it doesn't sound louder, but everything sounds softer because some frequencies are going to get cancelled by each other. So instead of having a nicer recording, we have a worse recording. On top of that, if we focus on those many microphones and then we forget of focusing our attention on the thing which is the most important, the main system, the stereo system, that one has to work, and then we have a poor capturing from all those microphones that they are cancelling each other. We are not going to get a wonderful result from it. So the thing is that instead of focusing on a lot of microphones and getting lost on that, we have to focus and start with the basic of the recording, which is 2-channel stereo. So I go back to the points that I was mentioning before. The stereo technique is the most important thing, and that's why sometimes I use four microphones in 2 pairs or 6 microphones in 3 pairs, because I extend the stereo system to other regions of the ensemble. I do like that because it sounds better, simply. The thing is to find the sweet spot, and sweet spot is found often with the help and with the support of the performers, because the performers have to find themselves the sweet spot for performing. So if the group is not placed well, if the group doesn't think about the inner dynamics, if one instrument is too loud or one instrument is too soft, the sound engineer cannot make the magic. They have to play softer or louder, because the thing is, if, for example, in this situation, if the second violin is too soft, and then you pull up the volume with the microphone of the second violin, it will sound a loud, soft sound. So a loud sound of a person playing soft. This is very important. So that's why it must work already with 2 microphones. That's why the ensemble has to have the major responsibility of what's going on with the music, and is in control. I would like to tell you a little story. I have a friend who is a photographer, and he was doing a photo shoot for recording project with a big orchestra. He wrote me back and asking, he wrote me and asked, Marco, this is the first time I see how recordings are made. I really like that. They were playing 3-4 bars at a time and stop. And the conductor had no single word on what was going on. And it was all conducted and directed from the control room by the sound engineer. Is that how the things are made, really? Because it's so disappointing. Well, I was disappointed too, because I don't want that my recording as a musician is taken in control by somebody else. I'm the musician if I am performing. So I want to be in control of my music. I want to decide what to do with my performance. And in the same thing, if I'm recording as a sound engineer, I respect the musician there, and the musician has to decide what to do. So it can happen that some things are not convincing enough when are recorded. The thing I do is that I go to the musician and say, listen, can you explain what's going on there? Can you make your idea more clear? Because without having the visual element, as I was telling you before, some ideas have to be expressed a little bit more clearly or in a different way, taking into the account that we don't see the musicians. So some dynamics, for example, that are also accompanied by the gesture, they will be missed in the recording. So the dynamics have to be shown in a different way. My idea is that if it doesn't work, it's somehow better to switch off the recording and rehearse simply and practice more, and then when it's all ready, we go back to record. It's less frustrating, more beautiful. It's still a piece of art, and it's music. Otherwise, it's just a computer-generated program, and I don't think it's beautiful. Nowadays, there are many musicians who are just changing into making live recordings and publishing the live recordings, of course with some cleaning up. For example, they record the concert and they use the concert as a main track, and then after the concert they stop and they do the repairs in the night if it's possible. And this is actually a very beautiful thing because you don't miss the performance. You have a performance going on, and then even with imperfections, it's not something that is completely aseptic like a MIDI file playing somehow. Even with the imperfections are part of the music. I mean, the human being is not perfect. The perfections is not human. We are somehow beautifully imperfect. So, and I think that's nice when that happens to the recording too. I believe that also we are influenced by the pop music too when we record. Pop music has influenced a lot of the recording industry, which is, I mean, it's fine. It's okay. It's one approach. I don't criticize it. Personally, I think a little bit differently because, as of what I said before, when we are going into the direction of having a too direct sound and too pop sound somehow for the Baroque music, we are creating something that doesn't really exist, and we are changing somehow the nature of this of the music, and we are creating, we are giving expectations to a public that will get disappointed when they will go to listen to the music. Because if I record a lute CD and this lute, I can hear all the imperfections of the instruments and all the, because the microphones are simply too close. When I go to a concert and I have a lute in the ideal situation, like 2 meters far away from me, I will hear it differently. So what happens that is in the recording, I have a different sound image than a lute. I don't get that. I get a surrogate. I get something that is resembling a lute, but it's not like a lute. So again, it's my personal approach. Some other people may think I'm wrong, or some may disagree. Fine, it's okay. Like I disagree with other approaches, other people can disagree with me. It's okay, it's fine. And this is the beauty actually of the creation of the art, because we can create different arts in different ways, and the final result will be different. So we will all be rich from it. We will all benefit from this difference. The recording should be, in my opinion, in a very good balance and a compromise between having a lot of information of what's going on, so not being overwhelmed by the acoustic, but still taking the acoustic as a part of the instrument. Maybe I think like that because I'm an organist also. I studied organ and I have an organ degree, and the church, the acoustic of the church is part of the instrument. There is no organ without acoustic. It cannot be. You cannot put a pipe organ in a living room. It will sound a little bit dry. So it needs the acoustic to be sounding well. And it's like that for every instrument. Even, I mean, every instrument has a resonance spot. That's the acoustic that needs to produce the sound to be produced. So for me, the acoustic is part of the sound, and we need to take that into the account when we record. So that's why the analogy with pop music can be destructive. Can distract the audience and can destroy the music, because all this, most of the pop music is done in studio, where there is a completely dry acoustic. It's completely neutral, and some effects are added later, if so or not. So it doesn't count the acoustic as part of the instrument. For example, I really like the old-fashioned pop recordings or jazz. because they take into the account the acoustic. They were done with noisy equipment somehow, the old-fashioned microphones with valves and so on, which are beautiful, and they are really getting re-employed nowadays again for some pop music and jazz or other type of music. For classical music, maybe not, because they're a little bit too noisy. So we lose a little bit of the purity of the sound of the instrument. But anyway, the comparison is very effective, because I think, in my opinion, the acoustic has to be there all the time. Of course, how much acoustic, then it's about a matter of taste, and sometimes it's not even taste, but it's just a compromise, because if you have a church with 10 seconds of reverb, you cannot take that away, and then you cannot completely cut it. Of course, there are digital plugins that can remove part of the reverb, but you lose the sound. So you lose part of the sound as well. So this is another compromise. Either you have less reverb to get your recording comparable to something that it's available in the market, or if you just record it in a big church, accept it, and that's it. that's the sound of where you record it. Of course, get it as less as possible with the use of microphones that don't take so much acoustic, and get as close as possible to the source, but don't try to alter the sound digitally to get to a model of market. If you want that model of market, then find an acoustic that suits you. So again, it's mostly of the choice of the organizer of the project, or the performer, or the music director of the ensemble. I think I can resume my approach with early music and new technologies with the fact that there is a single recipe. There are many recipes. It's like a different tastes, different foods that you want to prepare. There is not only one way to make it. There are different ways, but we have to take into the account that it all starts with a good preparation of the ensemble recording. Without that, there is no way that this recording is going to be successful. So the very important thing is that the ensemble has to be well prepared. The acoustic has to be beautiful, because with that acoustic, the things are going to be more and more difficult. So I'm not talking about hiring the most fancy concert hall, but what I'm talking is about trying to find a place where it's friendly for the music you are going to perform, because otherwise it's going to be a hell. There is one beautiful piece I would like to share with you, some bits of some selections. It's from a recording I've made of Monteverdi's Orfeo. It was performed with my ensemble in Jarosław Festival in southeast Poland, done with my ensemble, Contrasto Armonico, and it's so beautiful for me because the acoustic was big. It was a big, beautiful church, and I recorded this with just 2 microphones. So I found a sweet spot. I found a very beautiful placement of 2 microphones, and you have all the details of everything. You don't need anything else. So for me, that was a big achievement, both musically and also in recording-wise, technically. The 2 microphones I used were 2 Schoeps, German-made, beautiful microphones, and they are wide cardioid. So they are in between omni and cardioid. So they don't take 100%, 360 degrees of angle, but they take a little less, but still they are not so direct like cardioid microphones. So I use them spaced with a little angle. Actually, I cannot remember the angle now, But it was really beautiful placement, and I'm very happy about the result. The recording is completely untouched. I didn't add any effect, any equalization, anything. It's just the sound as it comes from the microphone. So for me, that's the ideal world where I can work on the sound from the players, from the position of the players, and from the placement of the ensemble, of the orchestra, and not by touching things, too many things later. So it's important to get top quality at the moment of recording. It's like cooking. With the best cooking you get when you have the best ingredients. The last thing I would like to say is that microphones and technology makes life easier, but don't solve the problems, because the problems are solved by the intellect, by the way of thinking, by thinking out of the box. Some solutions in both musical and recording, I mean, in the technique of recording, are often solved by just thinking out of the box. Thank you for listening, and see you in a while with the question time. Goodbye.
Okay, now I can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I just say that microphones don't solve problems. Technology don't solve problems. Actually, they make even more problems.
Sometimes, yes. But thank you for this fabulous webinar and the huge knowledge. I think for musicians and non-musicians is very valuable. Now I speak something in Polish, and then we will try to ask you some questions. Dziękujemy bardzo za wykład Marco Vitale i zapraszam wszystkich Państwa, którzy słuchacie, do zadawania pytań poprzez platformę YouTube'ową albo na Facebooku. Okay, my first question is that what was your hardest experience during the recording?
Oh, I had so many because
so you have to choose.
It's very hard because it's never an ideal situation. Never. Most of the time, it's because of budget. Because either there is a wrong place to record, either there is too little time. Either in the case of Poland, if you record in a church, there is a mass every day, or at least one. So you have to unplug all the microphones and the day after rebuild everything again. I think this is actually the most the most difficult situation, because you have to match then the sound between these different days, and to redo it, you have to measure everything. You have to maybe put some tape on the ground, but then sometimes they don't let you put the tape because the floor is old, and they are afraid. Of course, I mean, they are afraid of ruining it. So this is actually the most difficult time that I had.
Okay. How to prepare ourselves to recording? What is, from your point of view, important when some musicians is coming for recording, and it's better to record a whole part or divide it to small parts? Well, what do you think?
There is a big misunderstanding in the performers. The thing is, some people think that recording it's just easier because you can repeat things many times. I heard one guy saying that it's like recording can be of course can be like a football match, where the match doesn't end until everybody sign a goal, makes a goal. It's partly like that when the musicians are not well prepared and they expect that everything will be fixed in post-production. I participated in some recordings where this happened, unfortunately. So there was no rehearsal, and the people were just rehearsing during the recording. Sometimes, yeah,
ages.
it doesn't really work, and it's always better to find a concert before recording, playing that program in front of a real audience, rehearse well, and then record. And then sometimes, for example, even a half an hour of rehearsing before each piece, refreshing the piece, is nice, because there is a wrong assumption that recording it's fine because you can repeat it as many times as you want. And in fact, it doesn't work like that. In putting together the editing, the best takes are always the first ones, because the people are less tired and less bored. So if you give 2 or 3 good takes, it's fine, and then you do little patches. So this is the way I like to do, both as a performer and also as a producer when I am on the other side, because I mean I'm not going to listen all these wrong takes.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. It's nice that you give one performance like in a concert, and then if there's something to fix, you do it later. But it's nice to give one.
Did you have such an experience that it was just once record at once?
Yes.
Without any.
Yeah, it's possible. It's possible. There are several recordings of myself performing, but also other people whom I recorded, that there are just one take or with little repair because there was a noise or because there was a wrong note. But then you repair one bar or one note. That's it. But if you are well prepared, it's possible, and it is even beautiful, because then that makes a difference between a fantastic recording and a computer generated thing.
Okay, so what is easier for you, to record early music or to record classic or modern? Is there any difference?
I did once a modern recording. There was a live concert, and there was a modern piece. It was a bad modern piece, I have to say.
Okay.
So I didn't enjoy that so much. No, in the end, I mean, there are really beautiful modern pieces, but I don't do it a lot. So it happened a couple of times. The thing I do mostly it's early music. So this is my field.
The way how you record, is it different? The early music or the classic or modern instruments? It's different.
No. I mean, there are not really differences. The approach is the same. The thing is that the knowledge is different. I mean, I have a lot of knowledge in early music because it's my field.
Yes.
So I have an image of sound already that should be there. And if I hear something that doesn't work, I can immediately fix it. even by suggesting something to the ensemble, maybe, or just in the placement. Because, for example, sometimes some people come and they don't really have a fixed or strong idea about how to sit. And then I can suggest something, if I suggest something, it's because of my direct experience, which I don't have for modern music, for example, because it's not the thing I do every day.
Another question: do you have some kind of ranking for the best recording place in Poland?
Oh, yeah, that's a difficult question, because the problem is that normally, when I was living in the Netherlands, for example, I was using churches for recording, and it's normal there in the Netherlands because the churches are not so busy, so they only work on Sunday, for example, if they are not closed at all, because some churches, for example, they have problems, they have no people there. But in Poland, churches are very active, so even if there are churches with fantastic acoustic, it's very hard to use them. So you have to go then to other places like concert halls and so. I must say the if you can afford Studio One in Warsaw, it's really beautiful. For recordings, it's better than concerts, because it was actually designed, in my opinion, it was designed for making recordings, and it's very nice. But it's expensive. It's not cheap. Then I did one recording of a CD in a very nice place, which was a wooden church nearby east part of Warsaw, Żabia Wola, west part of Warsaw, Żabia Wola, around Nadazin, that place there. It's a wooden church. It sounds like a warm studio. Very nice, very beautiful. So maybe the wooden churches are an option, because also they are not so busy. The problem is that you cannot heat them in winter because of fire problem. So winter can be a problem, and there is always a problem of making the microphone away because of the service, because of the mass and so on. So this is a problem. But as a ranking. Yeah, this is a difficult question, because I didn't find yet a perfect spot that can be available also 3-4 days without having to move things around.
Okay, we have question from YouTube from Filip Lenka. Do you think it's better to record early music in a professional studio or in a more authentic setting like a church or ballroom in a palace?
Is the question meaning, it's about style of architecture or just acoustic? Because if it's about architecture, it's about taste.
Acoustic.
Yeah, I think yes, it's definitely better, not because of philosophy and because of just mental inspiration. Because when you play in a dry acoustic, so a dry studio, you play differently than when you play in a longer acoustic, in a more reverberating room. So the way you play is different. Adding reverb later, I say it in Italian, it's like putting cream on the carbonara. It's the same. You shouldn't put the cream in the carbonara. So you have to get the best ingredients. So if your music is a Sonata da Chiesa by Corelli, for example, you should aim for a church. Don't do it at the studio. And maybe a church is even cheaper than a studio if we talk about budget. You can you can offer a concert, and maybe the community will be happy to listen to the concert. So the thing is that if the music is, for example, only harpsichord, maybe a studio can be fine. But again, they never played this music in a very dry acoustic like a studio, because this acoustic didn't exist. So in 18th century, they probably never heard the sound of an instrument inside a recording studio. So we should keep this in mind. I hope I replied to the question in a good way.
Okay. One question from our sound engineer. Do you use Auro 3D technique for recording? Do you know?
No. I don't, because it's something that I didn't find it necessary for the audio productions I do.
Okay. Okay. Do we have some questions? What do you suggest? What microphone for musician recording at home, just for themselves?
Yeah. There are some nice. It depends from the budget. I don't want to make commercials here,
Okay.
but generally you can start with a pair of cardioids, maybe, because they don't get too much acoustic from the room, and maybe start experimenting with these things I was giving you, with these angles I was giving you, just the NOS, for example, which is nice, and or ORTF. So with a nice pair of cardioids, you can just get a nice sound. I don't know if it's good to mention any website where you can buy things, but there is a very good German shop where everyone is buying things, and then you can just make a search on the cardioid microphones. There are for different prices. I would avoid the very cheap ones, because it's about durability also. So maybe it's just better to spend a little bit more money and having some nicer microphones, for example.
Okay. Why recordings always sounds different than a live concert?
Yes. No, it's just what I was saying before, and this guy, this photographer, who has a very strange relationship with recordings, he's listening a lot to recordings at home, and sometimes when he goes to a live concert, he has this issue that the sound is completely different. Because I think I cannot give an answer, of course, because who knows how many reasons there are behind that. But maybe we arrive to a certain point of advanced technology and possibilities, or of exploring the different sound systems. For example, I was talking about stereo techniques, but there are other systems. I'm not going to start mentioning them now, but anyway, there is not only stereo. Like the sound engineer asked about this 3D system. I mean, there are many other things, but the thing is, if we go so far from the let's say the real music, from the concert, I don't have an answer, but this is the question. Are we sure that are we going to give a good point to the live music then? Because if everything is so perfect and so shaped and so defined in the recording, when somebody will come to listen to our live performance with mistakes, with imprecisions, with sound not being so focused like Razor, are we doing something good to ourselves? Question. Okay? So it's like when we watch a 8K movie on a fantastic screen, and then we go to the theater. In the theater, we have a distance, and if it's an old-fashioned theater, they don't have microphones, so they speak like without microphone. Yes. So.
Okay. So last question: digital or analog technology for the recording?
It depends from the digital, and it depends from the analog.
For you?
I use digital because it's more practical. Because, for example, I make recordings, location recordings, and sometimes I fly with the equipment, so I need to be as compact as possible. I cannot afford to travel with analog stuff, and so for me, digital. But it depends. The quality, it depends from which equipment you have. If you have perfect converters, and if you have a bad analog stuff, so it's better than digital. But if you have a fantastic analog and you have a mediocre converters, so the converters is the one that transforms the analog signal into digital. it depends from the quality of the equipment. Of course, the compressions. There are many things that we should talk about, because what we hear in the CDs, it's a compressed sound. What we record is often a full resolution sound. So this is also a different topic.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's all. Thank you very much for your knowledge,
Thank you.
for your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Greetings from Bydgoszcz.
Thank you. I hope I will see this city, because I'm curious about how the city looks, but I've never been there.
So you're
So
always
maybe one day.
welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And
Have a
bye.
good day. Bye bye.